Welcome to Marketing. Grab some coffee and let's talk about what's working in marketing, who these strategies are designed for, and how to be customer-centric while we do it. Hey there, this is Leanne with Marketing. Thanks for joining us today. I've got Theresa Potratz, who is the Director of Growth Marketing at Smartphone now, and she has an amazing background, and I can't wait for everyone to meet her and learn more about her. Theresa, tell us about yourself.
Yeah, on the whole, I'm an industry agnostic marketer with over a decade. I've got to do a lot of really fun things from a lot of non sequitur places. I've done a couple of years in higher education. I worked for a couple of years at a small independent board game publisher and then done several years in tech. The big through line for all of that has always been, how can I tell somebody's story and get it in front of the right customer at the right time and really turn the company into their clients' cheerleaders and really help them enjoy and partner alongside.
Yeah, you're an amazing storyteller, and I always enjoy all the anecdotes that you share with me. And I agree. Like, a lot of the things that we talk about here on this podcast is being customer centric and really getting to the heart of the matter. And, you just mentioned that you're agnostic for the different industries. And that's really the heart of marketing, is that it doesn't matter who or what, B2B, B2C, any of it. If you don't have a good story and you don't really give an F about your customers, then it's just not going to land.
Yep.
Or if it does, it's going to land in the wrong spot.
Well, okay. Just piggybacking off that, I worked for a coffee company for a while, and fresh in, I was like, okay, so who's our customers? Everybody.
Mass market, everybody.
I was like, okay, so 4-year-olds and Mormons. And they're like, what? I was like, no, so really, who's our customer? Because we're not hitting those two groups. So who are we?
Yeah. Coffee companies out there, I am your customer. Happy to take samples.
Same.
I will do you that charity.
Mm-hmm.
So, one of the things that is like a recurring question, and it's not very controversial, but like I always want to look at what problems people encounter as they're going about like doing their marketing strategies, because that's where we really learn, right? We don't learn from the like, oh yeah, I pressed the button and it worked and I made lots of money. Like, no, that's a fairy tale. But where reality is where you encountered something that made you think, or that made you have to overcome something else, or sometimes it just changed and you learned from it. So kind of taking that into mind, tell us about, a situation or something that you've kind of come across that you want people to think about as they're going about creating their professional life and their marketing strategies.
Well, I mean, I was thinking about this even just this last week, as I'm looking at developing, great plans for 2024 and making sure budget's allocated properly. One of the greatest learnings actually came from my last role, which is a failed startup. And just a little bit of background, it was, I get to use the past tense now. It was a med tech company, I could say femtech. It would revolutionize how IVF is performed and the outcomes of it. And it was during COVID, during a time where we saw IVF markets take off. And this all seemed like a super good time to get into a company that's going to be very disruptive. So I was super thrilled to help. And the company itself was both the technology as well as the clinic side, because you need the clinics to prove the technology. And so we had 5 very expensive clinics with 5 brand new, very expensive labs. And my job was to drum up the demand to support that. Small problem, I didn't get to choose where these markets were, and there may not have been adequate research to ensure that there was a large enough total available market in each of these regions. But my job was to fill it. And historically, you come into this role and you're told like, okay, you need to improve rates by 40% over last quarter, or whatever the number is. This was our brand new expensive lab can do these number of procedures. So your goal is to go from 0 to 100 in a quarter. Go.
Which sounds like a pharma sales job. One of my best friends used to work for one of the large pharmaceutical companies, and that hearing about your experience, it sounds more like you were in a sales role instead of like a marketing role almost, because there's timelines and realistic things that you can and can't do.
Yeah.
Um, so with like that kind of very high um ask, I don't know what else to call it,
Yeah.
request, with that, um, you know, hindsight being 2020, we know that that wasn't feasible, or just
Yeah.
whatever went wrong. Um, what what were some of the red flags that made your spidey sense kind of tingle early on, and that you should have listened to, or something that you thought was going to be chill or fine, or not at all an issue that turned out to be a big one?
Well, okay. So I would say the company itself all seemed straight. And I don't think that I had any initial early indicators that things were going sideways. It wasn't until the CMO that I've been reporting to left the company about a month into my tenure there that I kind of went, oh no, now there's only two marketers on the team. Yeah. Um, but, I will say from if I had more political clout within the company, one of the big things that I tried to do at the very end as a Hail Mary was really switching the products that we focused on to drive, a greater return on ad spend and really take advantage of the markets that were available. Like maybe I just needed to switch from IVF to, egg donor to really capitalize on what was available. That if I had had the foresight and started that, a good 3 quarters earlier, that could have maybe delayed it. I mean, there were endemic problems that I couldn't see, that I didn't have access to until it was too late. But that was something that I found very interesting, that looking back, I'm like, okay, I think if I had identified that, pushed harder, and tried to do that, it could have been different.
Yeah. So as you say that, it sounds like one of the only things that might have been a question that someone else looking at their next opportunity in this like heavy, talent, like there's so much talent available right now. If you're on that end where you're looking at your next role and it's in a startup, one of the questions I always tell people to ask how much cash runway there is.
Yeah.
That will not give you an honest answer. They may not know.
Well, and
Depends on the
I was
startup.
I was told 2 years,
Yeah.
and spoiler,
It was not 2 years.
no.
And when you're in the interview process, there's this kind of like fine line of what you can ask and what's reasonable and what's, just gonna start to alienate both sides. And you can't ask, maybe you have a better polite way of doing it. If so, please share with the community. But you can't say, what are your financial projections based on? You can't necessarily act like an investor.
Mm.
Um, and that can really be hard. And it also kind of brings up this other thing, is that we all love blaming somebody, and sometimes it's just how things happen. It's not like oh well, this person just totally, screwed things up. Sometimes it's not even that. Sometimes it's
Right.
just how the world works. And that's kind of one of those myth busters. One of those fairy tale things that sometimes the world just isn't friendly to startups.
Yeah. I mean, and honestly, there's one question I asked my current CMO that I think is a good question to ask anybody. And that is, first question, what are the goals for this next year? And then once they say that, the follow-up question is, what's going to get in your way, or what has the potential to get in your way to distract the team from hitting that goal?
Yeah.
And that will help at least identify the red flags. And hopefully, if they do like obfuscate, that you can be like, oh, okay, you dodged that one.
Yeah. And maybe they just don't know. They don't know what they don't know. And that's why they hired you to come figure it out. That happens too. Um so, I mean there's always some really obvious ones that are the low-hanging fruit, but you should start there. Is it going to be people? Is it going to be processes? Or is it going to be product? Like,
Yeah.
which one of those three is it going to be? Is it going to be all of them? What exactly are we solving for? And that's where maybe our high school math and, geometry teachers and all those people that taught us to go through these like logical steps, maybe we need to say I'm sorry to them because like at the time we were probably teenagers about it and being like, nah, never going to use this in my real life. But you do.
Mhm.
It helped you learn how to think through things. So some of the risks with even knowing what your goals are and kind of the position you were in, what were some of the risks that you thought that you were taking on versus what was the end risk that it
Right.
actually turned out to be?
Well, the initial risk was one that I uncovered. So let's assume that we had the runway. Let's assume that we ended up getting that Series B funding that was really what we were reliant on. When I came on board, what I did first thing, which is something a lot of growth marketers do, is they look at the sales funnel and they try to see where the bottlenecks are. And for me, we would have our MQLs, these are qualified leads, and we would lose, I'm not kidding, 90% of them. And it would be like, okay, well, we're hemorrhaging leads here. So let's deal with that. And it was recognizing, what are our leads not getting that would help convince them to move to that next step, to schedule a doctor's appointment, to meet with one of our providers. And it was something simple like setting up an email nurture campaign that hadn't been done before I got there. I was like, oh my gosh. And then it was like, okay, well, let's fine tune it. Let's add more to the series. Let's, experiment. So I think, just being willing and able to take risks and understanding what success looks like and how are you going to identify if it's not working and when do you decide to cut bait from a solution that doesn't have legs.
Yeah, I mean, I think that hemorrhaging at the end is so is something we've all experienced. And I think that this is where a an easy temptation to like just blame sales happens, and it's not always sales' fault. And more often than not, it doesn't have to be an us versus them. It needs to be that collaboration.
Right.
And one of the biggest things that I know I've experienced as a consumer has been that they were being sold something that wasn't what they were actually getting.
Mhm.
And whether that's intentional or a mistake or, this one word in the messaging just missed the mark, that's where we can really take a look at those losses. And I love like the lost deal interviews for exactly this reason. They're so
Yep.
juicy. Like
Well, and you bring up a good point. Particularly when we talk about alignment. I think one of the alignments that we don't see often is with marketing and CS. Because you think of marketing and sales; those go together like oil and water. But we totally forget CS in the mix. But in a previous role, I was trying to figure out why our messaging wasn't landing online, and for this very specific vertical, right? And previously with our other verticals, we'd use the word monitor. Yeah, do this and monitor, do this and monitor. And the CS was like, what do you know? No, you can't say that to mortgage and lending supervise. And I went, what? Like, how is that different? So we switch out the word A B test it. Suddenly that works and that takes off. But without that networking, without that face to face and dialogue, I wouldn't know.
yeah. And I mean, I think that that's where you have to kind of routinize these cross department collaborations because it not that it couldn't happen organically, but even in an office setting like where you guys are all with cubicles with each other, that conversation's not going to happen unless you look for that conversation.
Mhm.
And I know I say that with like a lot of vocal fry because I'm in LA, but at the same time, you have to make room and intention for these things and to avoid these pitfalls. And I think that that's kind of one of those risks or mistakes that happen, whether we just get so boggled down with, the hamster wheel marketing, or it just isn't on our radar for whatever
Yep.
reason. Or maybe we've been told not to. That's happened. Um, but you still gotta relentlessly pursue collecting information and collaborating
Mhm.
across all the departments, even the ones that don't necessarily seem obvious. Okay, that's my soapbox. I'm
No,
here to interview
I
you.
mean, you're free. I mean, I just wanted to clap at the end of that.
um, you can tell that I'm really chatty with my coworkers. I'm like, please more. Like, let's talk.
Yeah.
Um, because you have to. What are some other mistakes or myths or just landmines that you've seen people come across or that you've experienced unintentionally when trying to come in and have some really aggressive growth goals?
I think, and this is actually one I shared with a mentee of mine. And, I found him like getting set up to make the exact same mistakes that I've made over and over again. And one is you come up with this brilliant plan and you wait until the meeting with all of the stakeholders and you present it to them and they shoot it down. They completely see all the holes. They can't believe that you didn't see them. They lose respect for you. And you're just like, but what? The one thing I found that seems to be very effective is meet with each of the stakeholders one on one prior to what are the holes in this, and ask the question, how can I make this better? Don't assume that it's good. Don't say, hey, what do you think of this? Because they're going to assume that you want to hear, it's fine, it's good, but how can I make this better? And then you get buy in from them. You answer any concerns that they have. And then you do that for each person. And then when you go to the giant meeting and you say the exact same thing you've just said 6 times, everyone goes, "Oh my gosh, that's great." And if there's disagreement, if somebody says, "Well, what about this?" Now you've built a cadre of people who are willing to say, "Oh no, actually, she's thinking about this point, or this is what we're trying to combat with this point, or this campaign will cover that." And it took me way too incredibly long to learn that. So anybody take that, use it, go forth, prosper, learn from my mistakes.
Yeah, I mean, I think that that's such a huge thing because when you go straight to the executive committee or the board or whoever you're presenting to, and you don't do that, it's almost as if you're presenting a rough draft. And they are stereotypically, don't waste my mother effing time
Mhm.
group. You've got to keep it brief, concise, and clear.
Yeah.
And if you're not answering those objections ahead of time because you've, filtered it through all the filters, then you kind of are like just giving them a rough draft. Um, and they know it and they will not tolerate it. They might, you know what? They might. That's very close-minded of me. There are some very kind leaders out there, and may we all have them. That's my wish for everyone is that we have these very kind, patient leaders that nurture us. But they can still be both. They can be pressed for time and want a final draft in your presentation, and still be a kind, nurturing leader.
Mhm.
Now that I've stuck my foot in my mouth, just, it's
You're
gonna
all good.
happen. Um, so aggressive growth goals. The people that think that they're the right fit think that they're the right fit. When is it not the right fit? I mean, like, let's go for some like subtle underdog kind of reasons. Like,
I
when?
mean, like, okay, so having gone through a series of interviews, one of the things that I recognized is I am not a Fortune 500 girly. That's not me. Like, for me to be able to say that I have experience leading 40% year over year growth, that is startup numbers. You don't go to Nabisco and say, I'm going to grow this company 40% year over year. You can't. There's not the market share. And I think if I had sent my resume to a Fortune 500, I wouldn't have gotten the interview. That's not the chops. And that's fine because that's not what I want. I don't want to be pigeonholed into doing one small thing over and over again. I want to use a bunch of nebulous ideas and form them together and create this very cool campaign. Um, and I think that's the fun thing. So if you have somebody like me who's very creative and you say, "Hey, we are a very buttoned up brand. We don't believe in having a tweet that goes out." This is, I say tweet. I dated myself just now. without 16 hours of review processes. That's not me. I'm not going to thrive there. And so I think you need to find a lot of alignment between the human and the culture of the company. And if you've got alignment there and they have skills, then I think the rest of it is just kind of massaging it in and really learning the product and how the company operates. I think those are the big fits.
Yeah. I mean, I think that there is definitely, you mentioned market share, and I've seen big, kind of more conglomerate companies take on a new avenue, and that's where they would hire someone that has that startup vibe. And I've definitely seen the opposite, where I've seen somebody from like an F100 try to do F100 things in a startup vibe, even if it's
Yeah.
not a startup anymore. There's plenty of mature companies that are in this phase of maturity where they need some new, fresh, they need a reboot.
Mhm.
And it's, if you're used to all the resources and all the departments and all of the support that an F100 has, and you're suddenly in this startup mobile,
Yeah.
it's going to be painful for you. Or you're gonna have the time of your life because you finally got to do the things that you never got to do. But it's going to be whiplash.
Mhm.
um, but that's, if that's you, do it. Like, don't wait for permission. Like,
Right.
you know,
Right.
I think that's kind of the startup vibe that I love, even from, a little bit of an arm's length, is just the go for itness.
I mean, the concept of building the plane as you land it is a very frightening and exciting prospect. Like that is the good side and the bad side in one.
Yeah. And I mean, so, the question of like, you're building the plane as you're flying it. So what's the worst thing that happens? Well, you crash.
Yeah.
And then
Everybody's out of a job. Congratulations. You have failed.
yeah, you failed. But, per all of our, cliches and heartwarming memes that we see, did you fail, or was this a learning experience?
Oh my gosh. Like,
Uh,
I mean, I would prefer task failed successfully, you know?
yeah. Yeah. Um I think that this also kind of, one of the biggest goals, not biggest goals, biggest trends I see for 2024 is with this massive tech layoff scenario that we've seen happen in 2023, and this huge amount of just top-notch talent. What I've seen time and time again, especially in this end of, this Q4 2023, is these people not trying to find a new job and just doing their own thing.
Yeah.
And so I think we're going to see a lot more of that in 2024. But at some point, whether it's, a year from now or 16, 18, 24 months, there's going to be a rebound where, people are just like, I want to, like, you need people in seats, full-time employees, to make the results that you want to get.
Yeah.
And you can only Frankenstein it for so long.
And honestly, you bring up a lot of really good points there. I think a lot of the big tech layoffs, they happen for a variety of reasons. Maybe the company overhired, or maybe they just didn't manage them correctly. But the people that got worked into the ground, like they're burnt, like they're the ones in their bathrobes, laying in the snow on TikTok, screaming about how they've driven themselves into the ground and they're going to just, have a bear moment where they live in a cave and eat artisanal cheeses. And
Sounds
then they'll
great.
be out when they're done, And it's like, I respect that. I relate to that. And I've been there. So,
And and I have to say this so that it's said. You do not need to burn out to get results. You will get more results by not doing it. And one of my big things that I feel deeply is, do more with less. Do less. Do less. You don't need to do everything in order to do good marketing.
Yeah.
You don't need to be everywhere. You don't need quantity. You need hyper-focused, like well executed, good stuff. And that's what you need.
Yeah. The times I've performed my best is when I have scheduled time blocked out of my calendar where I am staring at a wall, thinking about what am I not thinking about? How can I make something better? And having that downtime. And if I'm like, I have nothing in my brain, reading a book or listening to a podcast on marketing or watching a webinar. But when I don't have that time, when I'm too busy head down sprinting for longer than a sprint should be, I'm putting in 50, 60 hours of work and I'm not getting the results.
Yeah, you don't need more hours to make more money. And that's something that I know for, like, it's a fact. This is based on evidence. So this isn't just Leanne's opinion. Even though I get to be very opinionated, this is based on research, peer-reviewed research. So, I think that as leaders, as mentors, as mentees, as human beings, we need to learn to advocate for that balance. And that's part of why I think that there will be a rebound into full-time employeeship, because when you work for yourself and you are a very driven person, you might be more likely to drive yourself into the ground.
Yeah.
That's what I did. I was a horrible boss to myself. I was the worst. And, and it took some maturity to realize, like, I would never talk to another human being about their work the way that I was talking or shoulding myself about my own.
Yeah.
And, once you kind of find where is going to be the best work environment for you, maybe you're better than I am. Maybe you have less.
Oh, I'm not. Like, I closed my consultancy because I just, nope.
Nah. And even with this podcast, I've had to see where I was doing too much and kind of reversing a little. And that's great. We need to learn and evolve. But, as a full-time employee, there's more of this like group where you can share task levels and you can reduce burnout and you can build each other up and collaborate. And I think that all of that is hugely impactful and makes things great and warm and fuzzy. Like we could, I'm not going to wax too poetically.
Well, I mean, but I do want to piggyback off that because one of the things I've learned about my own brain, I'm neurodivergent. So for me, this is probably a bit more to the nth degree than the average human, but I need to be learning something novel and making new connections. Like, you want me to be a better marketer? I need to be learning another language. I need to be learning a new craft. And if I'm not, I'm going to give you the same basic dribble I gave you last week.
Yeah. And I think that where all workplaces can benefit from inclusivity is that to some degree, that's how all brains work. It's just God, I hate this word because it's such like a trigger word, but it's a spectrum.
You're good. Well, yeah.
It is. And that's not just like, neurodivergent, neurotypical. It's just human, like, physiology, right? Because on a day where someone who is, would classify themselves in one bucket versus a different bucket, depending on how they ate, sleep, drank, stress, blah, 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 their brain, their physiology is going to demonstrate and manifest in a certain way. But that is not this episode. But it is something to think about when we're talking about burnout and when we're talking about how we show up in our work and when we talk about what does it take to get the marketing done is that you have to know how you operate. And that is the first gift that we can give ourselves as marketers, is knowing when to say yes to coffee and when to say no.
Anytime after 3, and that's a bummer.
It's such a bummer. So I've started my part about where I think the future of marketing is going. What do you see on the horizon about like where it's going versus where do you think it needs to go?
I see it going down the same trajectory that I saw it going a decade ago. When you look at B2B brands, they're starting to operate in a more personalized fashion towards their independent leads. And they're starting to treat them more like B2C, hyper personalized B2C brands. Like as a marketer, you have to market to me very specifically. I need a lot of love. And if I don't get it, I'm out. If you're going to cold market or cold email me and I didn't opt in and you don't immediately come out the gate with something catchy specific to me and mention my specific pain point that day, that time of year for my industry, I'm out. And the companies that are really nailing it, they have the people who can write a cold email that'll stop me dead in my tracks. They know exactly what I'm up against. But if I have the hint, like just the briefest guess that this was copy pasted from another email and you changed it from Brian to Therese, I'm out. And I'm seeing more companies actually treat that. Like there is an incredible person on LinkedIn that very few people know about as far as I'm concerned. I mean, she's got a decent following, but it could be tenfold, and I don't think anybody would be upset. Allison Goatee. She comes up with email marketing content that is both incredibly funny and very specifically helpful. And she made the point several months ago where she said, no marketer will tell you that they send spam, but every single one of us gets spam emails. And that's something that I wrestle with regularly. Like as I'm looking at this email that I'm getting ready to send to, a lead list, why do they care? Why should they care? Because if I don't care about it, why should they?
Yeah. I mean, mic drop. Like, if you, why should they? And I think that that's one of those questions that even we need to like really be real with ourselves when we're writing our copy and our messaging is we really got to be like, yeah, marketing Leanne thinks this is great, but does customer Leanne think this is great?
Yep.
Maybe not. And then trying to protect that copy through the multiple levels of approvals.
Mhm. You say that, and I think of every single press release that starts with blank company is proud to, and I want to smack the copywriter with a newspaper. Just be like, no, nobody is proud to announce something. They are proud they did something. They're not proud to announce it.
Maybe they are proud to announce it.
I doubt it. When do you imagine Phil Knight or whoever the current CEO of Nike is proud to announce a new shoe? They're proud of the collaboration they did and the work. I mean, like,
I mean, yeah, I can imagine now this like I now have a mental model of a scene where he is like, just on his phone. Yeah, okay, have PR do it. Okay, cool. And then like hangs up and says that he's like proud to announce it.
just good enough,
Like,
whatever. Proud.
Yeah. I'm yes, make sure proud. I want that in there. Sorry to pick on, specific Nike CEO. It's all
No, it's fine.
parody.
Okay.
So the future of marketing you see as kind of coming back to this like B2C kind of place. And I agree with that. I think that the level of expectation on the consumer side as individuals is now that we've been conditioned. Our tolerance for crap has decreased because there's just so much noise.
Yep.
And so, where beyond that, like, do you think that's the right move for things? Do you think that that's realistic or sustainable, or kind of how do we do that?
I think it's not necessarily sustainable, when you word it like that, because if you look at the model of like, well, I'm one of, 5 stakeholders in my company that would need to be involved in this purchase decision, you're going to need to really ABM a startup or an SMB. And that's a lot of work. To get just to segment the audience correctly is a lot of work, let alone to come up with a unique hook for each individual person because that's going to be different. So, I mean, and perhaps it is, I'm going to talk myself out of what I just said. Perhaps it is more sustainable as we look at, really not leaning heavily, but using tools like AI to augment that. And I think right now the industry is talking a lot about, using AI to write the mediocre copy. But I think more and more marketers are actually going to start leveraging it to saying, hey, ChatGPT, how would you grade this email series? What is missing from it in great email marketing? And really using it as just help you with machine learning, as opposed to doing the writing for you, but like have it kind of grade you.
Yeah. And, thinking of one of my favorite softwares that does not at all sponsor me, but if they would like to, I'm totally down. When I think about Mutiny and like what they're doing,
Mhm.
and something that stuck in my mind when I talked to their CRO, Julio Bermudez, is that you have to have that statistical significance um in order for certain aspects to be as effective as they could be. And when I think of startups, I think of a big struggle in having quantity and reps that equal statistical significance for the first while.
Yeah.
Eventually they get there. They fail. Eventually something goes one way or the other. But that also comes with like data literacy, understanding when this is not enough of a sample size for your A and B test. You know, A and B testing isn't meant to be like person A versus person B. It's it's got to be bigger than that. And that costs money. It costs
Mhm.
money to get that sample size. And this is where we could follow this down the rabbit hole into discussions about private equity availability and fundraising and bootstrap, and the whole gamut. But I definitely see AI as a way to make things better and
Mhm.
to help us match, this person. Maybe we have to like uh gum and toothpick it and, make it, like self-selection on our websites where like they tell us which part of the population they fit in. And then we route it to one set of things based on their, hand raising. Um, and that's one way to do it without a huge tech stack or, sample sizes. But, to some extent, just finding ways to be clever and in thinking to ourselves, if I could automate this, how would I do that?
Mhm.
And can I do this in a way that doesn't require automation? Because even
Yeah.
even even Zaps cost money.
And I had one leader that said something really incredible. He was not a salesman, but he was in the SLT, and he said, "Look, I can outsell any member of the sales org." And he goes, "The problem is I can't outsell all of them."
Exactly.
And it's recognizing that level of limitation and recognizing, where the good enough point is, and then what you can do to ramp the other people higher enough, as to where they can eventually surpass you. Fingers
Yeah.
crossed.
Fingers crossed. And that's why I like people instead of Chat GPT is because people stick with their learnings when you teach them a content guide, style guide, inspiration. You don't have to reprompt them every time.
Mhm.
Well, maybe you do, but eventually, once again, it goes one way or the other. Like they either learn or they move on.
Right.
Uh, you know, um, so I've got a big question for you. This is one of my favorite questions to ask people because it always just uncovers so much. What is a question someone should ask you, but they don't?
Mm.
And the the kind of context of this is, let's say someone comes to you for advice and they ask you XYZ and you're like, no, no, no. You miss the point. Like you really need to be over here at ABC, not asking these questions at all. The other thing is what is, other way people take this question is what is something about Theresa that no one knows about that they should just be asking you?
Oh, no, I mean, I'm an open book. I overshare. I'm the TMI queen, like that's a loaded gun. Um, I think ultimately the question that people don't ask is, one I alluded to earlier, which is how can I make this better? Of recognizing, first off, we can come up with all the main character energy that we want. But the truth is everybody is the star of their own show. And we just need to assume that we don't have it right. And if we have it like incredible, like it's going to miss the mark with a couple of people, a couple of mark or audiences. And so it's like, okay, how can I make this better? And then taking what they say and either going, gosh, they're a pile of crap, know nothing. And then ask somebody else the same question and see if that, is a common refrain or like, oh, you actually do have to go back and improve step one. But I think just, being willing and humble to say, how can I make this better? And coming from the stance of, this is not incredible as is. So let's improve it.
Love it. Absolutely. And to the defense of the people that we like to earmark as maybe, not catching what we're saying, maybe we were talking over them and we really need to do more explaining. Maybe we're the Ursula in the story. And
Right.
that's a very uncomfortable thing for anybody to really be open-minded to is maybe it's you. Maybe we all need to be Taylor Swift. Maybe it's me.
It's
I'm the
me.
problem.
Hi, I'm the problem.
Um, I almost had my Eras Cup to feature on this. Much like one of my favorite other podcasts. They have enough traffic. I don't need to drop them. But there was a lot of things that we tossed around talking about. Do you feel like there was something that we didn't hit on that I want to kind of like circle back to or leave space for?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that I've learned, when I think about, the failed startup that I will be taking into, future roles is always making sure to have a test budget. Because it's easy to like when you talk about statistical significance of like, okay, look, we have this big bucket of money that we use to get the leads that we need. Obviously, we want to increase. And so we're going to need to launch a couple of tests. What are those tests? What is the money set aside for? It's like, well, we already know the tests are going to take up 10% of the total budget. And with that, here's the tests we want to run. Here's what success looks like. And if we don't have this number of results by this date, we're going to drop it. And it's just like by having that all in play, I think that's great. And I mean, I've had another marketing leader recently ask, when's the last time you failed? And I'm like, what day of the week is it? I have tests going all the time. Like that's not necessarily a fair question. And I don't look at it like, oh my God, I failed. I'm like, oh, why? Like, why did it succeed? Why did it fail? Be curious, ask questions.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that can be really, really impactful. One of the things that I remember distinctly when I stumbled upon it early in my marketing career, especially with ads, was understanding how much volume, like finding where that line of your test is reached a significant enough volume to give you real answers to get through that learning phase, and when it needs more learning phase to be anything, and finding out how much that cost is associated with it. That was one of those moments where I was like, oh damn, I need to know this. Like, I'm gonna write this down in my notes. Because especially with the automations and stuff and the algorithms and all of this tech that we interface with just to do our jobs, there are those amounts. So, if someone's earlier in their career and they heard you say 10% of the budget, thank you for being specific.
I mean, and that number is so different.
Place.
Yeah, it depends on what the appetite for risk for the company is. How much growth do you actually have to drive? And if you're like, no, we need to make payroll. So we know spending all of the money on this very specific straight trajectory, great. But if it's like, you know what? We've got room. Let's go play.
Yeah. It's always the fun part. Yeah, we've got room. Let's do it. It's like,
yeah.
So guys clearly get very excited about that. If you were only listening, I knocked my microphone around just a little bit. It got a little animated. Great. Well, I think that there's just so much that we have as marketers to improve on. And like you said, what day of the week did I fail last is like, I don't see it as a failure. Like, it's just second nature to have these trip, get up, keep going kind of
Yeah. Well,
existences.
if you're a scientist, you say, okay, this is my hypothesis. If you're wrong about your hypothesis, does that mean you failed, or does that mean you have, like, that's the learning opportunity,
Yeah.
like being a part of a failed company like that, it hurts. But going, oh, that subject line didn't win. Okay, next. Like, I'm not going to go cry in the shower.
Nor should you. And I think that that's where people that take things very literally, like myself, like, I struggle when someone says, "How did you fail?" And I'm like, "What do you mean?" Like, I
Right.
mean, I make mistakes, but I certainly don't fail. Um, so I will keep that nudge to my little brain, to be more inclusive of what the word failure could mean. Because that's part of it, is that you know, we're all here because we want to be better at what we do. And in defining different things as either in this kind of nebulous, yeah, that was a failure, but it was also part of the process, um, is important to keep in mind.
Totally.
I'm on fire today. I think it's a good day, but I know that you have so much that you do and offer, and part of your storytelling that I've been so impressed with is in your just kind of for funsies activities.
Mm.
So tell us about your success with your podcast and what it's about, and maybe your favorites, like uh synopsis of one of the episodes, maybe, like,
Okay.
or just silly thing that happened.
So I have a crazy history podcast. It's called Unhinged History. And after I launched it, there's another person who came out with their podcast, which is Unhinged History with but. So if you see Unhinged History and that's it, go for that one. Um, but it's me and my co-host who is just a friend of mine, and we started sending each other several history related memes and then giggling at them and then joking about how we should start a podcast where we compulsively learn the things we found in a meme and then info dump on the other one and record it. And that's what it turned into. And so that's what Unhinged History is. And so one episode is like, okay, so about this time that this one comes out, there's an episode about a man named Colin Gubbins. And Colin Gubbins is the most incredible man that you've never heard of. He was the director of the SOE for World War, which was basically what started MI6 and founded the CIA and the whole nine. But Colin Gubbins, just an incredible man who, looks very debonair and is the reason that the British got the Enigma machine, because he went to Poland to chat with the Polish resistance and ends up getting his hands on this German tech and making sure it gets to London. And he starts the guerrilla warfare unit that, with just the amount of explosives from one small plane, took out 19 Nazi facilities. Like, he did more with a small group of people than armies, plural, were able to accomplish. And it's just incredible, like, to go in and be like, okay, wait a minute, is he inspiration for James Bond? Well, he employed James Bond's brother, so maybe. You're like, wait, what?
Yeah, how come we don't learn more about him? I think
Yeah.
I'm down. I want to listen to this already. I'm into it. I love this. And a lot of other people do. And it turns out that you've had, a fair amount of downloads because it's cool. It's fun. And I think we all like hearing stories about um other unhinged people. And I say other, grouping us all, because we can all be a little unhinged at times. But mostly we're
Amen.
professionals and we are completely hinged. Totally.
While clocked in.
Wall clock. Totally. Absolutely. Grown-ups in the room, which is, that's the part about being a deep person, is that you have different dimensions. and you know when and where to use them. And sometimes the storytelling from a podcast like Unhinged History helps you be a better storyteller about whatever product or service that you're using, because you can add it to like a mental model, you know? Imagine that your cybersecurity is guerrilla warfare and that you're blocking these attacks from these like solo actors instead of some big wide bandwidth. And there's just
Right.
there's
Right.
ways to connect the dots.
Well, and there's one episode about a guy named Stuart Drummond who was a like mascot for the Manchester Football Club. Maybe not Manchester. I made that part up. No, I'm gonna Hartlepool. That's what
A
it was.
football club.
I figured it out. It's the Hartlepool. It took me a while to pull up the file, but he ends up running for mayor as the mascot and wins, and then ends up becoming the best, like the only mayor the town had, and he had his job for 11 years before they canceled the mayorship. But it's still just like he had no experience, but he rose to the job and commanded a group of 3,000 people in City Hall. Like, what? So, I mean, there's stories like that that exist that are really fun that you could pull into your everyday life.
Love it. So, and I think that kind of, I'm going to bring it all together. We talk about fairy tales in business, and we talk about what the reality is, and how some ventures just don't. It's not always an exit that's successful that ends up in millions of dollars. We can't all be Jeff Bezos. We can't all be, Bill Gates. We wish to be. And we should take that, and we should hear these stories and find motivation and inspiration and reflection in them. But, while being pragmatic and realistic and learning from stuff. So with that, I'm going to kind of wrap things up. If someone wants to find you or contact you, what is the best way to do it?
I'm very active on LinkedIn. Even if I'm not posting, I'm always there. So drop me a line, say hi. And beyond that, I spend a decent amount of time on TikTok goofing off. So
Awesome. Yeah. Chronically online really helps us as marketers. Totally does. Absolutely. Gives us ideas and inspiration and keeps our finger on the pulse. If someone's looking for you on LinkedIn, they would spell your name.
Theresa for Theresa, and Potratz is Potratz. So there's a pot rat. Z is in zebra.
Perfect. And I am Leanne Dow-Weimer. If you want to ask me any questions or find out more about me or this podcast, it's info@markigy, markigy.com. And I also am chronically online, clearly on LinkedIn. And I only lurk on TikTok and Reddit, so you will not be able to identify me there. All right. Thank you so much for listening, and have a great day.